Hey y'all, I'm James Wright, and welcome to my shop. Today we're making this clock kit, which is giving me the chance to experiment and try a few things. So let's dive in and make a mess of things. This is a fun clock kit, and I actually got this one from clockkits.com. They sent this one to me to play around with. And I figured I'm going to try something really different and wacky. We're going to make a pyramid for this thing. And to do that, I'm going to need a corner piece. So we're making these sticks that come down each corner. So right now I'm cutting them down to 3/4 by 3/4. This whole thing for me is an experiment. I am trying something very new and different. I don't know if it's going to work, and I don't know what I'm going to have to learn along the way. And this is what I love to do, is just to experiment. I'm not going off of any plans. I'm just playing with it. So we're going to cut a 3/4 inch strip, plane down the surface, mark the next 3/4 inch stick. And I need to make a bunch of these because we need 4 of them, one for each corner. I don't know what angle they need to be at, and I know that this is going to be a lot of fun with weird and crazy angles. After the fact, I found out that they shouldn't be square 3/4 by 3/4. They should actually be a parallelogram that's 3/4 inch across, but around 1.125 wide. I'll cover that later, and it's all in the plans if you want to follow that. So I'm going to hold up all the sticks and see, they should be about that long, and then I'm going to cut one to length and test it out. Make sure you use your best marking screwdriver for this. As you can see, the length really doesn't matter that much yet. I'm just putting them together to try and figure out, because I'm going to need to cut a weird angle on the top of them. The other thing I'm going to need is I'm going to need to cut a rabbet out of one corner on all of these. This rabbet will be the place that the glass sits into. Originally I was planning on making a groove on 2 sides, but the glass is actually going to be running into itself, so the glass will hold the glass in. So I just need to cut a rabbet in this, and it's about 3/8 of an inch deep by 3/8 of an inch deep. So I'm going to use my Stanley number 50 and then cut a rabbet into it. I had to hold it up in between dogs to make sure that the fence wouldn't run into the bench, but it works pretty well. Now we're going to start cutting the angle on the top, and I eyeballed this. I don't know what it will need to be, and I figured we can adjust it later. So I'm just going to cut down one side with an angle, and then I'm going to transfer that angle onto another board, and then I'm going to cut that angle. I'm going to put these two together and see, does this look right? And if it doesn't, then I cut new pieces, and if it does, then we're good. I just need to figure out what it is. After seeing it and testing and finding this is the angle I want, then I'm going to cut that angle off of the other side. So we're going to cut 2 angles that are matching. In this case, though, I cut them at 90 degrees, and I found out later I actually needed to cut them at a different angle, which would have been okay if I made them as a trapezoid. It would have been making it much simpler. Again, that's in the plans. So we can hold these all together and try and get an idea and set them on top of the clock and make sure there's enough room. Originally, I was thinking they need to be square. They actually don't, because they need to be trapezoid, not square-shaped. For a glue up on this, I'm just going to glue 2 pieces together with super glue. I know it's not the strongest bond, but there isn't going to be a lot of force on this. And there will be other glue that gets put into this as well. A little bit of the accelerator, and then I can create the other one, and I'll have 2 of these pieces that I can then put together. And you'll notice here those angles don't match up. And that's okay. We're going to plane them down so that here they do match up, because we have 2 sets of these. We need them to glue together, so we need a flat space there. So a small block plane will clean them up, square them up, and then I can glue the other side on. Now with them gluing together, I can check and make sure that this is actually square. I'm going to measure from point to point and check everything to see, yes, this will work. It's not going to be perfect because it's a prototype, but that's how I make plans. We just make it up as closely as we can. So once we get these together, we can apply the same CA, a little bit of accelerator, and this will hold it in place until we get something better in there. I'm going to create some splines in this and just putting dowels through at an angle. But I want to make sure that they are square, so I need to make a marking on the actual top of the triangle, or the top of the pyramid. So to do that, I'm actually putting a piece of tape across one side, folding it over, and then putting a piece of tape across the next side, and then playing connect the dots. So the top edge of the tape actually creates a flat surface that will be my drill guide. So 2 of these pins are going to go through, and they just hit the top of the tape. And just like that, we'll then use some wood glue in this case as opposed to the super glue, because I want this to stick in very, very well. And then we can drill the other side. But if I want to drill pins coming through from the other angle, I need to make sure that they don't go through the existing pins. So I'm actually going to drill those a little bit lower. So we have 2 pins up high and 2 pins down just a little lower. Again, using the tape as a drill guide to make sure that I go across and nice and straight. these dowels will give me the strength to put this together temporarily. Later on, I'm going to flip it upside down and put some epoxy down into the gap at the very tip inside, and that will be probably the strongest hold. Now I need to flatten off all the bottoms, and it's really, really easy to do this. Just set up on the bench, and I use a pad of paper that I can take off pads until the pencil tip is right at the right height of the highest point that I need to cut down to. And then I can cut along the line and get them as close as I can. But they're never going to be perfect right off of the saw like this until your skill is perfect. And my skill is not perfect. So I'm going to come in with a plane and smooth them up, clean up any of the little burrs. But we can make them even better than this by setting it on the bench with some sandpaper, and then you can grind off the end until it sits perfectly flat on the bench. And this actually works really, really well. It's also a technique used for chair legs. And then I want to make sure that my measurements are all where I want it to be, because now we need to make a pattern. We need to make a pattern for the glass inserts that will go into it. And I'm not including a pattern for the glass in the plans because at this point there's always going to be small changes. There are going to be things that have adapted ever so slightly. So lay it out on the bench and cut out a pattern that matches your design exactly. I'm doing it out of a cardstock, and I can take this to my local glass cutter, and he will cut up the glass for me. Also, the tip on the triangle is cut off so that it's not a point up at the top. It's actually a flat spot that just disappears up into the top of the triangle. After that's all done, we can remove the tape and check the damage that's underneath. And it actually came out pretty well. I'm going to be planing off all of these surfaces, but before I get the plane out, I'm going to very roughly cut off the dowels flush with the surface. I'm not worrying about nicking into the surface that much because we're going to have to plane this all of these angles. The sides are not actually flat because I didn't cut it as a trapezoid, I cut them as a square. And so at this point, they're actually getting turned into a trapezoid because I'm going to plane them down flat with the coplaner with the stick beside it, so that each surface is now a flat surface, thus the pyramid. And this actually works really, really well, and I was very pleased with how this came out. At this point, I was planning on making a whole nother one of these because I didn't think it would look quite right with planing the surfaces down, but in the end, it actually it came out very well, and I was immensely pleased with how this fix actually worked. Now I want to cut the top off on this because I want to put a knob on the top that you actually grab, because we want to be able to lift the case up off of the base. And so a triangle is very hard to grab onto. And I found a square triangle pyramid-shaped drawer pull. And I thought, hey, that would make a really good top. So I'm going to cut the top off flat with about where I think it needs to be, and then drill a hole through. But at this one, there is no way to actually guide it. You just have to eyeball that it comes out the center. So you may want to drill halfway from one side and halfway from the other. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, it just has to be straight enough. And that will be a spot for the screw to come up through the peak and then into the knob on top. And I kind of like that. I ended up flattening the top down a little bit more so the knob went down a little bit farther. And it just gives it a nice little finish off on there. Also, while I was at the store picking out the knobs for this, I found several pyramid shaped that actually don't come to a point. They're flat. And I decided to use those for 4 feet on the bottom to then match the one on the top. And I really like how that came out, but we'll see that a little later. So now we need to start fitting other things into this. We need to create a base that these glass pieces will then fit into as well. And that means we need to cut an angled groove. Ooh, angled groove. Yeah, this is where things start to get a little bit fun and interesting. I have pieces here that I made out of 1.5 by 3/4 inch stock. In the plans, I'm going to specify 2 inch by 3/4. There just wasn't quite enough meat on this for what I wanted, and that was one of the things I was less than happy with.
Get rid of all the
So for the angle, I'm going to use my Stanley 45 with a 1/8 inch cutter, and I'm just going to hold it at the angle, putting the bevel gauge in there to give me an eyeball to it. And this worked surprisingly well. I was coming up with all sorts of crazy jigs to hold it at that, but just putting the bevel gauge on there to eyeball it gave me exactly what I want. And because the glass is a 1/16 inch thick and the groove is an 1/8 inch thick, you have a bit of wiggle room in there, and you can play with that. So I cut the groove down deep enough, and now I basically have frame stock to make a picture frame to go on the bottom. We're going to roughly cut them at 45 degrees, and then we're going to take them over the shooting board and clean them up exactly. I'm going to cut one piece with 45 on either end and shoot it and make this my standard piece. I can take it over and check it on the frame, make sure it fits exactly what I want. and then I can use that piece to be the guide to cut the rest, so I can make them all the exact same. And so it's a lot of cutting 8 45-degree angles and then shooting 8 45-degree angles, making sure that they're angling the right way, because I always want the groove to be on the inside of the stick to fit into the glass. And having a good shooting board just makes it so much easier. With one of them cut, I can use that as a master to mark out precisely what I want on the others, and I can cut a little ways away from the line and then shoot it back to hit the line exactly, so that all 4 of these sticks are exactly the same size, creating the square I want. Happy. Now, then we come into how do you glue these together. And so with good shot corners, they're actually pretty strong the way they are. I'm going to add in brass dowels as a spline, but that's more or less just to match the top. So we're going to use a strap to run around it and make sure that it clamps in. I took this as a chance to make sure that the fit is the way I wanted. I can fit the glass into the slots and have the points all touch and they balance together. And then I can set the pyramid on top of it to make sure this is what I want. And indeed, it actually works out really, really well. I was very, very happy with the fit, and with a little bit of movement in the future, we can make this work. So, yeah, also make sure that it fits on this. I need to make sure there was enough space for the glass not to hit the bell. And I had a little bit of problem with that actually at the end, because I didn't quite leave enough, and I had to do a few slight modifications. But again, I addressed those in the plans. I'm going to use regular wood glue, put it on the corners, wrap a strap around it, and then cinch the strap down, and that actually works really well. I also have a picture frame clamp, but for some reason just couldn't find it. And before the glue sets, give it a chance to move things around and even it out, and make sure everything is just right. Then set that aside to dry. And while that's working, we can actually start working on the base. And I had this scrap piece of quarter sawn oak, and yeah, you know me and quarter sawn oak, happiness. So I want to make this base as big as I can, but it's going to end up being smaller than the frame that we just made. The frame is going to be the widest point of this. And so I want to make this to have a rabbet running around it that the frame then connects down into. So we're going to start by cutting it to length, cross-cutting it down, removing the sections that we do not want. I need a nice square, true edge on this, but that isn't exactly square, so I ended up freehanding it. And this is actually, I could do this on a shooting board, but large pieces like this, I actually prefer to freehand them and square them up. It's just simple. With the panel gauge set up from one mark, I can use that to mark both sides to make sure I end up getting a square edge. So we can cut it to length again, and then I can true up that side and then use the panel gauge to mark off the last side. And from that point, we can then plane it down nice and smooth, making sure we get that edge we're looking for. Now I can set the frame on top of it and figure out how much of a rabbet I need to create around this. And then I can set up my rabbeting plane to be that measurement. And so I set the frame in the corner, offsetting it all the way to one corner, and then drew lines on it, and that let me know this is twice the amount of rabbet. So I can put half that amount on all sides. So for the 2 long grains, it works really, really easily. It's just long grain as long as you're going with it. But with the cross grains, I was trying to get this spur off, but that screw just didn't want to go. And I didn't want to take the time to really work on it. So I'm going to have to hit that one later. I couldn't get the spur to work on it. So when you want to go across the grain, you need to have the fibers cut. And so I decided to just use my carcass saw and run the line on that, so I can cut down the sidewall of the rabbet with the carcass saw, then come in with the plane and remove the waste down to that line. It actually works really, really well. The other thing you can do is cut with a knife, cut the fibers, run the plane, cut the fibers, run the plane, cut the fibers, run the plane. But with this, you saw all the way down and then you plane down to it, and it's a little bit faster in my book. I also want to chamfer the bottom on this, and this whole thing is going to have fairly heavy chamfers on it just to get that pyramid look on there as well. So the bottom edge of this will get chamfered down really nice and heavy on there. And this will then bleed into the panel, which will then have chamfers on the top and bottom. With the white oak, I'm going to do a little bit of sanding, but this was a very rough planed bottom, and so I had to come through and scrape it off. With white oak, I really like to have the final surface be sanded because you get more dust down into the pores, and that will actually wick the finish down in a little bit deeper. So you get far more of that pop in the modillion arrays. You get that look you really want. Originally, I was trying to figure out how do I put these brass inserts into the bottom and trying to find the right drill bit to make it so that the brass insert would go in the right amount but without being too tight but still not coming out. It actually takes a little bit of trial and error, so I did some tests on that. But in the bottom of this, we need to put several brass inserts for the drawer pulls that I got earlier. And these, I remember correctly, are 832 threads, but you want to make sure they match your drawer pulls that you get. So I got these at the local hardware store, and they work out pretty well. You put a screw on it and tighten it down in, and then you can unscrew it and it comes out. I got some threaded rod as well that can go into the end of the drawer pulls, and I can cut it to length so that the threaded rod goes into the drawer pull and then into the insert in the bottom. And then these can just screw onto the bottom, and they become the feet that raise this whole pyramid off just a little bit. And I kind of like how they came out. These ones similarly match the finial on top, but they'll give a little bit more, and they have that flat bottom, so they work pretty well just to give it that one more touch. So now we have it rabbeted in, and now we need to make sure we get everything fit correctly before it all goes together. So I'm going to do a dry fit before taking the clamp off and actually doing the details on that. I want to make sure that indeed the bell hits underneath and doesn't hit the glass. So you can see how this all will come together eventually. The base will also need to get 2 holes drilled through it for screws to go up and connect into the clock. And the clock kit comes with the screws already. I just had to countersink a little bit with an auger bit so that the head went in a little below flush. But once I made sure the holes were in the right place, then you can put the screws in and make sure that this fits on. And indeed, it works out really, really well to connect the base on here. And that way I can tip it upside down if I wanted to, except for the glass would fall off. So don't do that. Now, I had one screw that got stuck in the brass insert, and I couldn't quite pull it out. So if you wrap a little leather around it, you can grab it with vice grips, and it comes out really easily. Okay, let's go back to the frame base. Before we do any of the cleanup on this, I'm going to put in those brass inserts. So we're going to drill from one side, then drill from the other side, and make those holes meet in the middle. And then I'm going to cut off a strip of brass and grind down the end into a point. And this will become basically the spline. It's not really there for strength. The strength is more or less all it needs to be. This is more to match these splines that were put into the top. And then we can cut them off, file them down flush, and we have that little bit of detail that just matches the dowels in the top. And I really like how this came out with the brass pins. I was going to use wood originally, but I saw the brass in my stock and thought, no, we're doing it in brass. And once you file them down flush, it actually looks really good. The next thing we need to do is actually chamfer this frame. We're going to do it on the top and bottom edge as well. And this can be a little bit tricky because you always have end grain that you're hitting from one side or the other, especially on your first one. But if you set it up in the vise and you plane in from one end and don't go out the other end, and then plane from the other end and don't go out the other end, you meet in the middle and you can chamfer it off. And this way you're always planing into the board rather than busting off the corners. And then we can work that all the way around. Next thing I want to do is actually create magnets to hold the frame down to the base. So I drilled several holes in the base and put the magnets in. Now, in retrospect, I wish I put these magnets in each edge rather than in each corner because I'm going to need to be putting some screws in through the frame. And so don't put these in the corners, put them on the sides. I put a barrier down of aluminum foil on top of the magnets and then put the magnets on top of that. Then put the frame on it and gave it a few light taps, and that put an indentation into the frame where the magnet is at exactly. And then I can drill out a hole in the bottom of the frame for the magnet to fit into. But I need to make sure the magnet is in the exact same orientation so that it doesn't repel away from the base, it actually sticks in. So when you flip them over, just make sure they fit. And then you can rub them down into place, make sure they're flush, hit them with a little bit of activator, and you can come back and clean up the mess from the activator and the finish with a chisel or a card scraper and get a nice clean surface. And now these two will magnet together and actually hold each other very, very well. And they fit down in there, and there's just enough pull. You're not going to lift up the base, but it's just going to hold it without fidgeting around. You don't really need this because it is rabbeted into place. It just adds that extra little bit of, yeah, this is nice. At this point, all the woodworking is done, and we are going to be starting to get ready for finish. I am going to be sanding everything down with a 400 grit finish. I'm just a light pass on every surface and anything that needs to be just hit up a little bit. This will force dust into the pores of the wood, which will give you that greater contrast, more blotchy look, but that's really what you want when you're doing quarter sawn white oak. It brings out the rays, and this really, really starts to pop. For the finish, we're using my homemade boiled linseed oil, and this is just, it's my absolute favorite for something simple like this. And you really start to see these white oak rays coming out. And you can apply it on. This is so safe, you can do it with hands, and just let it soak in as much as it wants. Let the wood take up as much as it wants, and I keep putting on more and more until it stops absorbing it. And then I let it sit for a little while, wipe off the excess, and then we can put on a coat of paste wax and then polish that down in and get a nice surface on there. It's not a really durable surface, but I don't need a durable surface for this. This is a showpiece, and this is for that flat matte finish where you can really feel the wood. It's just my absolute favorite for something like this. The last thing that we have to do is attach the pyramid to the frame. And so we're going to wiggle all the glass down into place, but I want to make this removable so that if something happens to one of the pieces of glass, we can take it out. And so I actually found it was easier to put it down in there and then strap the strap around it to hold it in place so that I could flip it over. So once I got everything held in place and clamped down, now I can pre-drill holes down through the base and then into the pyramid. And so I have tiny little brass screws that are long enough to go through the base and then about a 1/2 inch into the pyramid. I could probably go a little bit longer than that, but the 1.25 inch was just about right. I think I probably would have preferred 1.5 inch, but I didn't have those in stock. So we drilled down through, put a screw in, and that is what holds the pyramid itself to the base. And I really like how this came out. And so if there's ever any problem with the glass, you can take the screws out, replace the glass, and put it back. And of course, when cutting the glass, I had them make 5 panels, not just 4, just as insurance that none of them would break. And thankfully, none of them broke. So yeah, there is that. Unfortunately, the glass is an absolute mess. So we need to clean that, and I need to clean it several times because it got oil from the initial finish, and it was just a mess.
Window cleaner, not just for sharpening tools.
I ended up cleaning outside the panels and inside the panels and outside the panels and inside the panels, and it still got to the point where I wasn't quite as happy. I needed to spend a little more time actually detailing this, but I needed to get the video out. So it's not 100% clean, but it's clean enough. You can see through it. Last thing we need to do is attach the base to the clock, put the pendulum on, wind it up, and let it spin. And there you go. We have a clock, and I like it.
So there you have it. I've made several other clock kits from clockkits.com, and they have a lot of fun things. I did one with my daughter not too long ago. And it's an interesting way to try something different. There is no right or wrong way to do this. The clock works by itself, so you can make an enclosure to try something new. And I really had a lot of fun with this. Now, I do have to say a huge thank you to Clock Kits. They actually sent this to me to play with. And they're offering a 15% discount to anyone who also wants to try this. So there is a link down below where you can go and get 15% off of this clock as well. Also, I have plans available for this whole build. So if you want to try and duplicate this crazy thing, there are links to that down below. Have a little bit of fun with it. This one is it's different. So I hope you like this. If you think I should try something different or there's something I should try next time, let me know that down in the comments down below. Also, you can hit like, comment, and share, subscribe. Those things really help out and keep the channel going, so thank you. On top of all of that, there are a whole bunch of people scrolling over here. They are the patrons on Patreon, and I do want to say a specific thank you to them and members here on the channel who clicked the little join button. Without them, this channel would not exist. So thank you to all the patrons on Patreon and members on the channel for keeping us going. So on that note, I think I'll do it for now. Until next time, Have a wonderful day. And now you all can see precisely what makes me tick.